Malaria is a serious, sometimes fatal disease that is caused by a parasitic infection of the red blood cells. Roughly 1,700 cases of malaria are reported in the U.S. every year, and in 2016, 216 million cases of malaria were reported worldwide. When looking at the macro level component causes of malaria, some of the biological pathogens that cause malaria are P. falciparum, P. vivax, P. ovale, P. malariae, and P. knowlesi. Now, unlike the other pathogens that are typically carried by the Anopheles mosquito, P. knowlesi is actually found in primates in Southeast Asia. However, they are known to infect humans just as effectively. When looking at the socioeconomic causes of malaria, things like poverty, living in a rural environment, lack of an education, poor healthcare facilities, poor garbage control, and a lack of equipment can all contribute to malaria being prevalent. Now, this is where there's a distinction between developed and underdeveloped nations. A lot of the socioeconomic causes of malaria are more prevalent in underdeveloped nations. Living in a rural environment, for example, is much more prevalent in regions such as sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. It's also more prevalent to be working with livestock and agrarian type of work in these areas, which only increases the population for mosquitoes as there's a larger food source. Lack of an education is also more prevalent in underdeveloped areas, and when you don't have a proper education, you won't know the warning signs of malaria or the potential risk factors that cause malaria. Poor healthcare facilities are also more prevalent in underdeveloped nations, which does lead to a higher mortality. And poor garbage control only attracts more scavenger type of animals, which again raises the food source for the Anopheles mosquito. And as for the lack of equipment, it's much more prevalent in underdeveloped areas, which makes it harder to treat and to prevent. When looking at the cultural causes for malaria, prevalence of home medicines and remedies, as well as a poor reputation of the healthcare system, are reasons why malaria can be prevalent. Now, these are also much more common in underdeveloped areas. Things like a poor reputation for the healthcare system will make someone not as confident in trusting the healthcare professionals that will see them for their malaria causes, as well as not having a proper education will make them more likely to choose more herbal and home remedies over the science that is offered at any hospital. Also, healthcare can be quite expensive, which is also more likely to dissuade people from trying to seek professional help and much more likely for them to try and solve the problems on their own. There are also political aspects as to why malaria can be so prevalent. Things like a lack of government funds, poor hospital staffing, or mass human migration can all cause malaria to be much more prevalent in an area. For things like hospital staffing, it's very common for professionals from underdeveloped areas to try to practice their medicine abroad, which leads for a lack of actual healthcare professionals in the region where it's most needed. This is known as brain drain. As well as mass human migration, when a lot of people come to an area and are not used to the Anopheles mosquito, it is very easy for travelers and migrants to obtain malaria. There's also physical aspects that make malaria much more prevalent in an area. Things like a warm tropical environment, close proximity to the equator, and having low altitudes makes malaria much more prevalent in an area. And because warm tropical climates are found in places like sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, in comparison to a lot of developed countries in Europe and North America, it makes malaria much more easy to contract in these areas. For the biological environment, the Anopheles mosquito, which is the main parasite that carries malaria, is much more common in areas like sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Also, the presence of standing water can also contribute to the presence of malaria. And due to poor irrigation that is found in Southeast Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, it makes it much more likely for standing water to be an issue in these countries in comparison to more developed countries.